Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Funding. Today we're joined by Julian Atkins from the Church of England and Hamish Leese from the Methodist Church. Both are leading strategies within their own denominations to reach net zero. In this episode, we'll be discussing why this should be a focus for churches and how they're overcoming some of the barriers to getting there. So Hamish, Julian, welcome to the podcast. So as mentioned, both of your churches have set goals to reach net zero. It would just be great to have a very brief update to the progress you're making and the impact that it's already making.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2021, the Methodist Church set what they call an aspirational target of net zero by 2030. And one of the challenges with that is we didn't have a baseline to start from. So there's been a process of figuring out where we are now, as well as where we're going to and how we get to that point. So that's all been part of the conversation. But I think one of the great things with setting a target like this is it makes it a priority, and it makes it part of the conversation. And it was already something which churches were engaging with, but this has made it something which has had a far broader reach really throughout the church, within churches and within the Methodist Church circuits, districts. So it's really become much more part of the conversation. There are certainly ways that we can see the progress being made. We work very closely with Eco-Church, for example. So we've got around about 40% of our churches now are signed up to be Eco-Churches, and many of them have reached bronze awards or silver or gold awards, which is fantastic. And we're seeing things like the number of churches which are generating their own energy and using renewable energy increasing. So we really are seeing the benefits of engaging with this and setting a target, I think.
Yeah, a similar story, I think, for the Church of England. So we set ourselves a net zero ambition back in 2020. General Synod set us that challenge. The Church Commissioners gave us quite substantial funding, which kicked in 2023 to help us implement our route map to net zero, which we adopted in 2022, and that sets out what we're trying to achieve at a national, at a diocesan level and at a parish level. And since 2023, we've been supporting parishes and dioceses to try and make progress on the agenda. And I think we're making good progress in 2.5 years. We've got almost 1,000 churches now benefiting from some kind of support, either helping them to do energy audits, helping them to implement quick wins projects. We've been piloting a fundraising campaign in 8 dioceses, and we've got 129 churches participating in that. And they're on track to raise almost £1 million for small-scale net zero projects. So a lot of practical action starting to get underway. And our flagship project, which we're working with you on, Demonstrated Churches, we've got about 40 churches, just over 40 churches now, that are benefiting from project development support and capital works funding to help implement the projects once they've worked out what they want to do.
Brilliant. Some fantastic progress being made from both churches. Why do you think that Christians and the church should be making climate action a priority, especially when it can seem like a really vast challenge and there's so many other social issues to be addressing?
Yeah, I think for us as the Church of England, we have our 5 marks of mission. And the 5th one is all about caring for creation. So as Christians, we should be concerned about the whole of God's creation and doing everything we can to protect it. But there are issues also around social justice and equity around the world. And we see the impacts happening with climate change all over the world and closer to home. Last year, 2024, was the hottest year on record. We've seen the impacts of that. And it seems almost weekly now we're seeing some climate incidents somewhere around the world, the flooding recently in India, wildfires in California last year, and events closer to home, which just show us the damage that's being caused by these extreme weather events, largely driven through the warming of the climate. And what we're also trying to do is demonstrate to a wider community that we care about the creation, we care about future generations, and we know it's an issue that's of grave concern to younger people in particular, and so it's about us being able to demonstrate that we're thinking about their futures as well as the past.
I completely agree with everything Julian said, really. I mean, for me, concerns about climate and the environment are inherently justice issues. Those who are most impacted by climate change are those who've done least to cause it and often have the least resources to deal with those consequences. So as a church and as Christians who believe in justice and social justice, that's really important that we do engage with those issues. And again, I completely agree. We are reflecting on God's love for creation. God doesn't just love us as humans. Of course, God does love us as humans, but God loves all of creation, and being able to reflect that within our own discipleship and the way we act and behave. And I think the other thing I would say is we think about all of the things which are going on, which we see in the news around poverty, around migration, around conflict, and those are all connected with the climate crisis. There are many reasons for all of those issues, but the climate crisis is exacerbating, is increasing those issues. And so to care about poverty and migration is to care about climate as well.
You started by talking about some of the great progress that you're making. I think it was important to acknowledge some of the barriers that churches might face when making steps towards net zero, but also how you're working to overcome those barriers.
Yeah, I think there absolutely are a number of barriers that we do face, and I'm very aware that these are often barriers which are faced in local churches and groups of local churches. So one of the big issues undoubtedly is a financial issue. We are very keen to emphasise that this is not all about those big capital projects, but it also would be disingenuous of us to pretend that those don't form part of this. So we do seek to support churches through directly funding from the Methodist Church. We've been able to put £4 million so far towards helping churches around the country. Now, £4 million is one of those figures that sounds like a huge amount of money until you think about how that divides up. So we're aware that that's kind of a drop in the ocean in some ways. So it's about how do we help use that money to connect with other pots of money. And the Benefact Trust has been fantastic in supporting us at a national level and locally as well. So trying to connect people with where that money is, but also pointing them to some of the things that don't necessarily need huge amounts of money to do. I think there's also a real challenge around the capacity of people in churches. There is a sense in which this isn't something new, because how we engage with the world around us is part of our discipleship and who we are as Christians. But again, realistically, we have to acknowledge that this is something that we're asking churches to do. So what we're aiming to do at a national level is to avoid churches having to reinvent the wheel. So where we can bring together expertise and guidance to help churches in some of those difficult situations, so that they can focus on what they can do at a local level.
Similarly for the Church of England, the scale, it's just the scale of the challenge. We're trying to decarbonise a property portfolio of some 32,500 buildings. Churches, cathedrals, schools, vicarages, offices, theological colleges. And for many of our churches, they're significant heritage assets with significant and valuable artefacts, wall paintings, carvings, artworks, that kind of thing. And so we've got to be sensitive to their historical and heritage significance while also trying to decarbonise them. What we've been learning over the last 2.5 years is obviously funding is important, but it's not necessarily the main barrier. As Hamish was saying, is that the access to skills, the capacity to tackle buildings in terms of decarbonisation is becoming just as much of a barrier. We're finding it takes churches longer to understand how their buildings work, identify what alternative solutions to fossil fuel heating, because that's mainly what we're talking about, what those are, what's the right technology for that particular church or that building, then get the consents in place, get the funding in place and implement it. That's taking time. And for some of our churches that are more active and bigger, more complicated buildings, we know it's going to take several steps for those churches to get to net zero. And there are factors outside our control, grid connectivity, grid capacity, habitats and species constraints, and we've had a couple of projects which have hit those in the last 18 months or so. And the funding commitment's huge, but not the only barrier. It's just going to take us time, I think. The important thing is to try and do as much as we can. There's more than enough work to do. So we just need to stay positive. Every step we take is a step closer to the goal, and it's one less ton of carbon in the atmosphere contributing to the problem we're trying to tackle.
And I think that challenge of the historic and just buildings which don't necessarily conform to what you see throughout much of the rest of the country, over time we're seeing a lot of the technology improve and come down in cost, which is fantastic, but often church buildings don't fit that same model as others. And so helping churches to think a bit more creatively as well about how they might heat their buildings, for example. We see a lot of talk about heat pumps, which work fantastically in some cases, but finding other ways of heating buildings like infrared heating, and just helping them to explore some of the different possibilities which exist.
And it would be great to understand what are actually some of the practical benefits to making steps towards net zero as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of what we're seeing, and we keep coming across churches that are just getting on quietly and making the contributions that they can without necessarily relying on the funding that we're able and the support we're available through our programme, which is great. It shows that people are committed to the agenda and what we're trying to do. And we know from the churches we've helped over the last 2.5 years so far that those churches that are able to make inroads into their emissions, they're seeing the benefits. They're seeing the benefits in terms of energy reductions. In many cases, they're saving money on their lighting bills. Heating bills are a little bit more complicated because alternative technologies can be a little more expensive. You really need to think through what the right technology is. But we're seeing the social benefits. We're seeing churches being used more flexibly in terms of venues for community groups and that kind of thing. We know we're engaging younger people in the agenda, and they're really interested in the work we're doing. And we're providing warmer spaces. The thing that's been lovely with Give to Go Green, which is the match funding campaign that I referred to, is we're seeing that that's connecting the church with its community in quite a profound way. And people in the community who may not be churchgoers have realised, the church is trying to do something on net zero. That's a good project. We'll put some funding into that. So it's drawing in new sources of funding for us, which is great. It's connecting the community with the work that the church is doing, which has real missional benefits. And we're seeing long-standing improvements in giving after projects finish. There's some early research that's been done only recently, which is showing that there's a legacy effect which goes beyond the net zero project, which I think is really, really an interesting finding so far.
Yeah, again, I agree. I think Julian is quite right to have a note of caution around the financial benefits which do exist, because there are issues around the cost of electricity compared to the cost of gas and all of those things. But as I mentioned before, what we're aiming to do is not only look at those big capital projects, but some of the small things that we can do. And often what we're looking at is encouraging churches. Fundamentally, what we're looking to do is use less energy in a lot of cases, and using less energy means paying less money to energy suppliers. And so there are lots of those low cost or even sometimes no cost things that can be done to reduce energy usage, which can have a really positive impact in terms of the financial side of things. And similarly, engaging with people outside the traditional church who often are not the people the church finds it easiest to engage with. As Julian mentioned, often younger people. I don't want to generalize too much, but often younger people are really engaged with climate and environmental issues, and they're not always the ones that the church finds it easiest to engage with. So lots of those conversations and finding groups within the community who already really care about this and would love to see the church not only talking about this, but doing something about it as well.
I think there's some fantastic benefits, and you both picked up on engaging with young people and they're being more socially conscious. And I think it's brilliant, isn't it, from the aspect that for the sustainability, not from the green side of things, but for the sustainability of the church, if churches are engaging with more young people, then that could keep churches going even longer, which I know is another concern for churches as well. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think we have to be careful that we don't view this as a sort of tool of evangelism. We shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that we're using it in an evangelistic way, but really engaging meaningfully with this, engaging with the community and engaging with our own theology of these things, I think it does help to make many of those community connections which Julian was talking about.
Yeah, I think Hamish is right. The programme I'm running is very much focused on buildings and emissions reduction, but it sits within our overall environment programme within the Church of England, which is much more concerned holistically about issues of sustainability, looking at nature recovery, how we halt biodiversity loss and degradation, and how we just care for and manage our single island planet home in a more sensitive and caring way than we've done so far.
Yeah, and I think, again, to think holistically about these things, encouraging churches to be engaging with nature, planting for pollinators, all of those things which are associated with net zero, but maybe don't completely fit within that. And when we talked about the interconnected nature of some of the social challenges that we face, we know that things like green spaces are not evenly distributed across the country. There are large parts of the country which don't have much access to green space. So if we're able to use churches to invite people into, not even necessarily into the building, but into the spaces that we have, I think that's, again, a real positive for those churches and for the communities as well.
Definitely. So we know that climate scepticism does exist both within and outside the church. So I'd be really interested to know how you approach those difficult conversations.
It's an interesting one. I think what we're seeing a slow shift in the conversation. What we're seeing, I think, is that scepticism is slowly reducing. And we've noticed that the conversation, certainly within our networks, has shifted from why are we tackling climate change? Why is it an issue? To more about, how do we do it? How do we do it well? How do we do it most effectively? And so we have seen that transition in the last 2.5 years. Some churches naturally concerned about what it means for them, and it's easy to think, automatically we've got to find funding for an expensive air source heat pump solution, or we've got to put solar panels on the whole entire roof of our nave, and that, or we just can't afford that. And for some churches that's true, but there's always things that you can do. And what we're starting to say is that a good decarbonisation project is not just something which is tackling carbon, but it's looking at what's affordable. It's looking at what the needs of the congregation are. It's looking at what the church is trying to do missionally and approaching it in a more holistic way. And I think we're trying to have a conversation which is perhaps more rooted in reality and showing what can be achieved, rather than assuming that it's all going to be too costly and we can't afford it.
Again, I think we're in quite a similar position, and obviously there are some very high-profile examples of climate scepticism in the news at the moment and over recent months. But I think it's important not to overemphasize that as well within the context that we come from. And I think there's been some studies recently which show that actually support for climate policies and climate interventions is actually really high amongst the public, but is consistently, people think it's not as high as it is. So sometimes that really gets in the way of having those conversations. So I think it's about encouraging people to be bold and to engage with those things, and to engage with the people within their church community and within their broader community, and really find those people who are like-minded. I think similarly to Julian, we've definitely seen over the last few years a move away from the suggestion that climate change isn't real, or that it's not something for us to engage with. But I think what we do still find sometimes is a questioning as to, well, shouldn't we be engaging and talking about Jesus and not the environment? And I think sometimes what we're looking to do is kind of gently show that that's actually a bit of a false dichotomy, as we've been talking about, and show why talking about the environment is talking about Jesus, and it's talking about justice, and it's all of these things that we've already spoken about. So encouraging people to see the benefits, and we've just been talking about what those benefits are. So encouraging everyone to think, rather than what they can't do, think about what they can do, and that being the start of a journey.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a lot more silent supporters out there than we perhaps realise at times. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. We keep coming across churches who are doing great things for the environment, great things for net zero, because they know it's the right thing to do. And it's great that we keep finding these little examples where people are trying to do what they can and making a difference, and seeing it as a fundamental part of their Christian faith.
Yeah, it's brilliant having both of your perspectives, actually. And I think that leads nicely on to my next question, which is, do you think there are opportunities for more collaboration between different denominations to have an even bigger climate impact? And if so, how do you think this could work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are already a number of areas where there is collaboration. Last year, we worked ecumenically to put on the Green Church Awards, which was a wonderful award ceremony for churches of all different denominations around the country, and that we're putting that on again next year. We've worked together on things like carbon literacy training for congregations, which the Church of England has taken the lead on, but has kept us involved in, and that's been a brilliant conversation to be part of. I think fundamentally the theology on climate and the environment isn't really very different between certainly our denominations and many of the other denominations. So I think there absolutely is. And I think the other area where we've seen a lot of cooperation is locally. There are local ecumenical partnerships where Methodists and Anglicans worship and work together, but also partnerships between churches. So I think there are lots of ways that that's already happening. But certainly I think there is the scope for more cooperation. And I think that's something that we'll definitely be thinking about and working on over the next few years. Yeah,
I think for us, as a Church of England, we're fortunate to be in the position of having, resources at our disposal. We've got a good network across the country. And part of what we want to do is to share what we learn, both the successes and the pitfalls. And the examples that Hamish has given is all how we're trying to collaborate and work together. Part of our communication strategy is being very open about what we learn and the resources that we develop and making those available. For the last 2 years, we've been running an annual net zero conference. Hamish has attended those, and colleagues from other ecumenical partners have attended those, and it's all part of sharing learning. And it's part of my role as a programme director. I'm trying to always build those ecumenical relationships so that we can share what we're learning and learn from each other. And
with all of the experience and knowledge that you've gained so far from working in these areas, do you have any top tips or advice for any of the denominations, or even wider than that, it could be different faiths, who are wanting to start that journey to net zero? I think the first thing that I would say is just to get started. That in some ways, that's the hardest step to take. I think I would say that what you don't need to do is search for perfection before you get started. I think we've both been doing a lot of learning over the last few years about how we have the denominations that we're part of are moving in this direction. So there's been a lot of learning as we go. So I would absolutely say get started. Something imperfect moving in the right direction is better than nothing. The perfect is the enemy of the good. So I would say that that's one big thing. And I would also say
to reach out to other denominations. As Julian said, the Church of England has been really positive in terms of sharing learning, and we aim to do that as well. So I'd be very happy to have a conversation. There are other denominations, there are other groups, things that we mentioned Eco Church earlier on. I would absolutely have a look at Eco Church, encourage people to sign up to that, because one of the great things about Eco Church is it's not only about the church buildings, which we've talked a lot about today, because that's the main focus of net zero, I would guess, but it helps people to think really holistically around their buildings, their land, how they engage with the community, how they worship together, all of those different things. So yeah, just get started, and when you're on that process, do reach out to others who are on the journey together.
Yeah, absolutely. Make a start, and if you've got a strategic responsibility for net zero in your denomination, trying to get a handle on what you think your carbon footprint is. We've been running our energy footprint tool now for 4 years. We published the first 4-year results. We've just published the 2022 and 2023 reports. That's giving us a really good handle, and we've refined our understanding of where our footprint elements are. That's informing how our program moves forward. So try and understand what your footprint is. It's the same if you're a church. Try and understand how much energy you're consuming, and there are tools out there that will help you do that. There's our energy footprint tool, for example. There's the 360 carbon tool run by Climate Stewards and others. And then have a clear plan about what net zero means for you. We've defined it very clearly in the Church of England that at the moment it's focusing on our scope 1 and 2 emissions. So the energy we use to heat, power and light our buildings, that's what we're focusing on. But be clear about what's in scope, and then try and set a realistic time frame for action. That time frame needs to be stretching enough that it galvanizes people, but it also needs to be realistic, and you need to be clear about what success looks like for you, and that's a conversation we're having within the Church of England. And there was a lot of good work done before I joined this programme by colleagues who are no longer with us, and they were real champions in the organisation for this agenda, supported by senior leaders who also were champions. So it's important to find those like-minded champions who you can work with to develop your thinking and getting a plan going forward. And that's really what's given us a strong foundation for the work we're doing now.
That's some great advice. And it's been so fantastic to have both your perspectives on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Thank you.
No, it's been lovely to be here again.
And thank you for joining us for another episode of Beyond Funding. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify channels so you don't miss out on future episodes.